chapter 25 of 1 Samuel. Once again, we are reading the Holy Bible. We are in the Old Testament. We are getting to the end of 1 Samuel. We're going to pick up where we left off, which is chapter 25, the death of Samuel. Okay, so let's see. Samuel died, and all the Israelites came together and mourned for him. Then they buried him at his home in Ramah. The death of Samuel, Israel's prophet and judge, is mentioned twice in this book. In chapter 25, we just read it, and also in chapter 28. Both references state that all Israel mourned his death and gathered to bury him. Of course, not every Israelite attended the funeral service, but the leaders of the tribes were present to pay their last respects to a great man. It was Samuel's faith and courage that helped the nation transition from political disunity, remember the book of Judges, it was horrible, to a somewhat united monarchy. Since Saul and Samuel had been alienated for over 7 years, it is not likely that the king attended the funeral, but he would call on Samuel for help even after the prophet was dead. We're going to read about that in chapter 28. The people of Israel did not always obey Samuel when he was alive, but they were careful to honor him when he died. Such is human nature. However, Samuel did not prepare an elaborate tomb for himself at some important public place, but instead, he asked to be buried at his own house in Ramah, probably in the garden or in a courtyard. In his pride, King Saul had prepared a public monument to himself at Carmel. This is in chapter 15 of 1 Samuel. But Samuel, who truly deserved recognition, humbly asked to be laid to rest at his own home. So David knew it would be dangerous for him to attend the funeral at Ramah, for Saul would have his spies there. So he retreated to the wilderness. David had shown his love and respect for Samuel while the prophet was alive. So there was no need for him to make a public appearance. Samuel had anointed David king of Israel and had often protected David and given him counsel. How wonderful it is when the saints of the older generation spend time with the younger leaders and help to prepare them to serve the Lord and his people. And how encouraging it is when the younger leaders listen and learn. David and Abigail. After this, David went to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man. This is going to be another one of those interesting stories. There was a man of the clan of Caleb named Nabal, who was from the town of Maon, and who owned land near the town of Carmel. He was a very rich man, the owner of 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. His wife Abigail, remember that name, his wife Abigail was beautiful and intelligent, but he was a mean, bad-tempered man. Nabal was shearing his sheep in Carmel, and David, who was in the wilderness, heard about it. So he sent 10 young men with orders to go to Carmel to find Nabal and give him his greetings. Now, a couple of things. Nabal in Hebrew means fool. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Also, Abigail, his wife, was actually very beautiful and wise. Now, just in case you guys like, how I always like to collect facts, other women in the Old Testament that were called beautiful were Rachel in Genesis 29:17 and Esther in Esther chapter 2, verse 7. And of course, Abigail here. So let's continue. Okay, here we go. He instructed them to say to Nabal, David sends his greetings, my friend, with his best wishes for you and your family and all that is yours. He heard that you were shearing your sheep, and he wants you to know that your shepherds have been with us, and we did not harm them. Nothing that belonged to them was stolen all the time they were at Carmel. Just ask them, and they will tell you. We have come on a feast day, and David asked you to receive us kindly. Please give us what you can to us, your servants, and to your dear friend David. David's men delivered this message to Nabal in David's name. Then they waited there, and Nabal finally answered, David? Who is he? I've never heard of him. The country is full of runaway slaves nowadays. I am not going to take my bread and water and the animals I have butchered for my sheep shearers and give them to people who come from I don't know where. David's men went back to him and told him what Nabal had said. Buckle up your swords, David ordered, and they all did. David also buckled up his sword and left with about 400 of his men, leaving 200 behind with the supplies. This is going to turn out to be a very bad mistake for David that was prevented. Let me explain. During David's previous stay in the wilderness of Maon, which is in the vicinity of Carmel, his men had been a wall of protection for Nabal's flocks and those caring for them. Nabal was a very wealthy man, but he was not a generous man. When David returned to Nabal's neighborhood, it was shearing time, a festive event that occurred each spring and in early fall. David hoped that Nabal would reward him and his men for their service, for certainly they deserved something for protecting Nabal's sheep and goats from the thieves that usually showed up at shearing time. So David's expectation was logical, right? Any man with 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats could easily spare a few animals to feed 600 men who had risked their own lives to guard part of that man's wealth. Common courtesy would certainly dictate that Nabal invite David and his men to share his food at a festive season when hospitality was the order of the day. It would not be easy to feed 600 men in the wilderness, so David sent 10 of his young men to explain the situation and asked to be invited to the feast. Nabal refused to listen. So the character of Nabal is described as evil and hard-headed, with the NIV translates surly and mean, and the NLT describes it as crude and mean in all his dealings. People sometimes wonder, did he become rich by being dishonest to other people? Nobody really knows. He was from the tribe of Judah and the family of Caleb, one of the two spies who urged Israel to enter the promised land. But the name Caleb also means a dog, so perhaps the writer was conveying this meaning as well. This man was like a stubborn, vicious animal that nobody could safely approach. One of his own servants and his own wife both called him a son of Belial, which means a worthless fellow. The Hebrew word Belial means worthlessness, and in the Old Testament it refers to evil people who deliberately broke the law and despised what was good. When the young men graciously presented the case, Nabal railed at them. So what is that? Railed. Well, which the NIV translates to hurled insults at them. Now here's something even deeper. The Hebrew word describes the shrieking of a bird of prey as it swoops down to tear its victims. Yes, the shrieking of a bird of prey. It's used to describe Saul's hungry men as they fell on the plunder and butchered animals in 1 Samuel chapter 14 and chapter 15. So his words are found in chapter 25 and certainly reveal the heart of a man who is selfish, arrogant, and rebellious. Abigail, his wife, recognized David as king, of course, and called David my lord. But Nabal compared David to a rebellious servant who abandoned his master. It's obvious that Nabal's sympathies lay with Saul and not with David. Another evidence that he had no heart for spiritual matters, as his wife did. So when you note all the personal pronouns in verse 11, you immediately recognize his pride and self-importance. He didn't even give God credit for making him wealthy. So the young man reported Nabal's reply to David, who immediately became angry and swore revenge on him. David could forgive Saul, who wanted to kill him, but he could not forgive Nabal, who only refused to feed him and his men. Nabal was ungrateful and selfish, but those are not capital crimes. Saul was envious and consumed with the desire to kill an innocent man. So David's anger got the best of him. He didn't stop to consult the Lord, and he rushed out to satisfy his passion for revenge. If David had succeeded, he would have committed a terrible sin and done great damage to his character and his career. But the Lord mercifully stopped him. God's servants need to be on guard at all times, so unless the enemy suddenly attacks and conquer them. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. This is from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. David was a godly man and a gifted leader, but the best of men are but men at their best. So we're going to go to verse 14, right over here. Now, one thing, when the Lord is not allowed to rule in our lives, then he steps in and overrules. What does that mean? Well, he saw that David was about to act rashly and foolishly. So he arranged for a wise and courageous woman to stop him. Let's read about that. One of Nabal's servants said to Nabal's wife Abigail, "Have you heard? David sent some messengers from the wilderness with greetings for our master, but he insulted them. Yet they were very good to us. They never bothered us, and all the time we were with them in the fields, nothing that belonged to us was stolen. They protected us day and night, the whole time we were with them looking after our flocks. Please think this over and decide what to do. This could be disastrous for our master and all his family. He is so mean that he will not listen to anybody." Abigail quickly gathered 200 loaves of bread, 2 leather bags full of wine, 5 roasted sheep, 2 bushels of roasted grain, 100 bushels of raisins, and 200 cakes of dried figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she said to the servants, "You go on ahead, and I will follow you." But she said nothing to her husband. So when this anonymous young man reported his master's actions to Abigail, he was serving the Lord, whether he knew it or not. He knew he couldn't talk to Nabal about anything, so he immediately went to his mistress, a wise and prudent woman. In those days, the parents arranged marriages for their children, so we are not surprised to see a wise woman married to a foolish man. Also, it often happens today without the help of parents, by the way. Think about it. So, no doubt, Abigail's parents considered it fortunate that their daughter could marry such a wealthy man, and she obeyed their wishes. But her life with Nabal must have been tedious. All her husband was interested in was money, food, and drink, and having his own way. The servant reported how David and his men had protected the shepherds and their flocks, and how Nabal had refused to repay them. Did the young man know that David and his men were on their way to confront Nabal? Or did he simply surmise it, assumed it? Perhaps it was the Lord who gave him a special intuition that trouble was coming. You know, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Nabal and his servants were defenseless against David's 600 men. But if David had succeeded in his venture, it would have given Saul the evidence he needed that David was a dangerous renegade who had to be dealt with drastically. So as far as Abigail goes, she put together enough food for David's men, but said nothing to her husband. She was the mistress of the house, and could dispose of the family provision as she saw fit, even to the extent of sharing it with others. Nabal would have opposed her even though she was doing it for his own good. She wasn't stealing from her husband. She was paying a debt that he refused to pay. In order to save a little money, Nabal was foolishly jeopardizing the lives of everybody in his household, especially his own. 20. She was riding her donkey around a bend on a hillside when suddenly she met David and his men coming toward her. David had been thinking, why did I even protect that fellow's property out here in the wilderness? Not a thing that belonged to him was stolen, and this is how he pays me back for the help I gave him? May God strike me dead if I don't kill every last one of those men before morning. When Abigail saw David, she quickly dismounted and threw herself on the ground at David's feet and said to him, "Please, sir, listen to me. Let me take the blame. Please do not pay any attention to Nabal, that good-for-nothing. He is exactly what his name means, a fool. I wasn't there when your servants arrived, sir. It is the Lord who has kept you from taking revenge and killing your enemies. And now I swear to you by the living Lord that your enemies and all who want to harm you will be punished like Nabal. Please, sir, accept this present I have brought you and give it to your men. Please forgive me, sir, for any wrong I have done. The Lord will make you king, and your descendants also, because you are fighting his battles, and you will not do anything evil as long as you live. If anyone should attack you and try to kill you, the Lord your God will keep you safe, as someone guards a precious treasure. As for your enemies, however, he will throw them away as someone hurls stones with a sling. And when the Lord has done all the good things he has promised you and has made you king of Israel, then you will not have to feel regret or remorse, sir, for having killed without cause or for having taken your own revenge. And when the Lord has blessed you, sir, please do not forget me." David said to her, "Praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you today to meet me. Thank God for your good sense and for what you have done today in keeping me from the crime of murder and from taking my own revenge. The Lord has kept me from harming you, but I swear by the living God of Israel that if you had not hurried to meet me, all of Nabal's men would have been dead by morning." Then David accepted what she had brought him and said to her, "Go back home and do not worry. I will do what you want." So only, and I mean this, only a sovereign Lord could have arranged the timing of David's attack and Abigail's approach so that the two met. Abigail bowed before David and acknowledged him as her Lord and King. In fact, she used the word Lord 14 times in her speech. Nabal would have not approved of her words or her actions because he was a follower of Saul and considered David a rebel. Don't forget that. Abigail was a woman of faith who believed that David was God's king, and she saw King Saul as only a man. She quickly confessed that her husband was a worthless fella who lived up to his name, a fool, and she explained that she had known nothing about David's request for food. She accepted the blame for this iniquity. So in the rest of her speech, Abigail focused on David and the Lord and not on David and Nabal. And her emphasis was on David's future. By now, David was calming down and starting to realize that he was in the presence of a remarkable woman. She pointed out that the Lord had stopped David from avenging himself, and David admitted that this was true. So David blessed the Lord for providentially stopping him from killing innocent people, and he also blessed Abigail for her wise advice. David was a smart man to listen to reproof wisely given. It's not likely that Saul would have listened to a woman's counsel. David wrote in Psalm 141, verse 5, "Let the righteous strike me. It shall be kindness, and let him rebuke me. it shall be excellent oil. Let my head not refuse it. How we receive reproof and counsel is a test of our relationship to the Lord and our willingness to live by his word. David admitted that he was wrong, and the Lord forgave him, and the Lord worked out the problem for him. 36. Here we go. Abigail went back to Nabal, who was at home having a feast fit for a king. He was drunk and in a good mood, so she did not tell him anything until the next morning. Then, after he had sobered up, she told him everything. He suffered a stroke and was completely paralyzed. Some 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal had died, he said, "Praise the Lord. He has taken revenge on Nabal for insulting me and has kept me, his servant, from doing wrong. The Lord has punished Nabal for his evil." Then David sent a proposal of marriage to Abigail. His servant went to her at Carmel and said to her, "David sent us to take you out to him to be his wife." Abigail bowed down to the ground and said, "I am his servant, ready to wash the feet of his servants." She rose quickly and mounted her donkey, accompanied by her 5 maids. She went with David's servants and became his wife. David had married Ahinoam from Jezreel, and now Abigail also became his wife. Meanwhile, Saul had given his daughter Michal, who had been David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from the town of Galim. Okay, so what we have here, Nabal was feasting when judgment was just around the corner. He didn't stop to thank God for the blessings he had sent him, or even to consider that these blessings came because of his wife's faith. And in spite of his own meanness, Nabal's idea of happiness was not to praise God or feed the hungry, but to eat to the full and get drunk. Nabal made no profession of faith in the Lord, but was like the people Paul described in Philippians, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. That's Philippians 3:19. So wisely, Abigail waited to tell her husband what she had done. The news so stunned Nabal that he experienced a stroke, and he lay helpless for 10 days, and then the Lord took his life. What caused the stroke? Was it pride and anger on learning that his wife had dared to help David without his permission? Or was it shock and realizing the danger he had been in and how close he and his household had come to being slain? What if Saul heard that Abigail had befriended David? The king might consider Nabal an enemy and punish him accordingly. Whether one or all of these considerations caused Nabal's paralysis, it was the Lord who ultimately took his life. Sad to say, he died as he had lived, a fool. When David heard the news of Nabal's death, he praised the Lord for avenging him and preventing him from doing it himself. David's concern was the glory of God and the advancement of his kingdom. Abigail certainly must have been pleased, to set free from the yoke of such a wicked man, a man that she probably married against her will. David had been so impressed with her character and wisdom that he thought she would make a good queen. So he sent messengers to ask her for her hand in marriage. It was an opportunity no woman could refuse, would refuse, and she submitted to her king and even offered to wash his feet. In marrying Abigail, David was not only acquired a good wife, but he also got possession of all of Nabal's wealth and property, which was situated near Hebron, where David later established his residence in 2 Samuel chapter 2. So remember, he had already taken Ahinoam as his wife, since she is always named before Abigail. She was the mother of David's firstborn son, Amnon, and Abigail bore him Kileab, also named Daniel. So, but what about David's first wife, Michal, Saul's daughter? who had helped to save David's life, Saul gave her to another man, probably using the alliance as a mean to strengthen his own position and to break David's connection with the throne. There was no legal divorce, so Saul forced Michal into an adulterous relationship. When David was reigning over the tribe of Judah in Hebron, he demanded that Michal be returned to him. This is in chapter 3 of 2 Samuel. However, Michal did not remain a loving wife and probably resented David taking her father's throne. She ended up dying childless. 26. Let me get some more water, then we'll continue. All right. Thank you. Okay, chapter 26. Let me see. Hold on, please. 408. I'm going to need to read something from one of my other books. Let me get it ready here. Okay, got it. Okay, 26. Oh, where's my little marker here? Here it is. David spares Saul's life again. Yes, can you believe that? Some men from Ziph came to Saul at Gibeah. Those snitches again, I tell you, man. So some men from Ziph came to Saul at Gibeah and told him that David was hiding on Mount Hakilah at the edge of the Judean wilderness. Saul went at once with 3,000 of his best soldiers in Israel to the wilderness of Ziph to look for David. And he camped by the road on Mount Hakilah. David was still in the wilderness, and when he learned that Saul had come to look for him, he sent spies and found out that Saul was indeed there. So, like Nabal, the Ziphites were related to Caleb, but being members of the tribe of Judah, they should have been loyal to David, hoping to gain the king's approval for a second time, but they betrayed David to Saul. Saul had learned to appreciate David's skill as a tactician, so he took his 3,000 soldiers to search for David in the wilderness. But David was already far ahead of him, for his spies had located Saul's camp, and David was safe in the desert. The Lord kept David safe and delivered him whenever Saul was near. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. This is Psalm 18, verse 17. Okay, let's go to 5. He went at once and located the exact place where Saul and Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, slept. Saul slept inside the camp, and his men camped around him. Then David asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, the brother of Joab, their mother was Zeruiah, so Abishai was his nephew. This is a very popular name that we're going to read about later in the next couple of books. But this is the first time we hear of Abishai. Remember, Abishai was the son of Zeruiah, who was the sister of David. So it was his nephew. Which of you two will go to Saul's camp with me? I will, Abishai answered. So that night, David and his Abishai entered Saul's camp and found Saul sleeping in the center of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the troops were sleeping around him. Abishai said to David, God has put your enemy in your power tonight. Now let me plunge his own spear through him and pin him to the ground with just one blow. I will not have to strike twice. But David said, You must not harm him. The Lord will certainly punish whoever harms his chosen king. By the living Lord, David continued, I know that the Lord himself will kill Saul, either when his time comes to die a natural death or when he dies in battle. The Lord forbid that I should try to harm the one whom the Lord has made king. Let's take a spear and his water jug and go. So David took the spear and the water jar from right beside Saul's head, and he and Abishai left. No one saw it or knew what had happened or even woke up. They were all sound asleep because the Lord has sent a heavy sleep on them all. Interesting, huh? Interesting the way the Lord works even there. So the Lord must have instructed David to go to Saul's camp that night because he sent a deep sleep upon Saul and his men. Saul and Abner, who was Saul's captain and cousin, were sleeping at the heart of the camp. They were surrounded by the wagons and baggage. Because of the supernatural sleep sent by the Lord, David and his nephew Abishai were able to penetrate to where Saul and Abner lay. This is the first mention of Abishai in Scripture. So, as usual, Saul's spear was at hand, the symbol of his office and his authority. Abishai was sure that it was God's will that he kill Saul and put an end to his selfish rule and his relentless persecution of Israel's true king. But David stopped him. David had settled this matter in the cave, and there was no need to consider it again. He had also seen what the Lord did to Nabal. David was sure that Saul's life would end at the right time and in the right way, either by natural death or by judgment from God, and then the throne will be his. When Abishai looked at Saul, he saw an enemy, but David looked at him and saw the Lord's anointed. Instead of taking Saul's life, David took his spear and his water jug so that he could prove to Saul a second time that he did not have designs on the king's life. David did not let Abishai take the spear, or else he would have been tempted to use it, right? So it would have been easy to argue that David had been wrong in the cave and that God was giving him a second chance to kill Saul, but David's decision was based on principle, not on circumstances. David knew that it was wrong to lay hands on God's anointed, even though the king was not serving as God wanted him to serve. David might not have been able to respect the man, but he did respect the office and the God who gave the office to Saul. Mockery, verse 13. Okay, let's see here. Hold on. I want to make sure we're not missing anything here. 26. Okay, let's continue. Then David crossed over to the other side of the valley, to the top of the hill, a safe distance away, and shouted to Saul's troops and to Abner, "Abner, can you hear me?" "Who is that shouting and waking up the king?" Abner asked. David answered, "Abner, aren't you the greatest man in Israel? So why aren't you protecting your master, the king? Just now someone entered the camp to kill your master. You failed in your duty, Abner. I swear by the living Lord that all of you deserve to die because you have not protected your master, whom the Lord made king. Look, where is the king's spear? Where is the water jar that was right by his head?" So Abner is being called out at this point right here. David and his nephew made their way to the hill opposite Saul's camp, where they were safe. And David called back to the soldiers in the camp, and especially to Abner, the king's bodyguard. He was, notice this little detail here. David was careful not to humiliate Saul in the presence of his men. Although Saul could have easily escaped the embarrassment of the situation, David did not identify himself to Abner, but only referred to himself as one of the people. The absence of the spear and water jug was evidence enough that someone indeed had been close to the king and could have killed him. Abner was guilty and could have been disciplined for not doing his duty. Okay, 17. Saul recognized David's voice and asked, David, is that you, my son? Yes, your majesty, David answered. And he added, why, sir, are you still pursuing me, your servant? What have I done? What crime have I committed? Your majesty, listen to what I have to say. It is the Lord who has turned you against me, and offering to him will make him change his mind. But if some people have done it, may the Lord's curse fall on them. For they have driven me out of the Lord's land to a country where I can only worship foreign gods. Do not let me be killed on foreign soil away from the Lord. Why should the king of Israel come to kill a flea like me? Why should he hunt me down like a wild bird? Saul answered, I've done wrong. Come back, David, my son. I will never harm you again, because you have spared my life tonight. I've been a fool. I have done a terrible thing. David replied, here is your spear, your majesty. Let one of your men come over and get it. The Lord reward those who are faithful and righteous. Today he put you in my power, but I did not harm you, whom the Lord made king. Just as I have spared your life today, may the Lord do the same to me and free me from all troubles. Saul said to David, God bless you, my son. You will succeed in everything you do. So David went on his way, and Saul returned home. So let's see here. Something I want to mention here. David trusted in God, okay, obviously, who blesses the righteous and the faithful. David understood the principle that Jesus later spoke of in Matthew chapter 7, verse 2. And this is important. That's why I'm bringing this up. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verse 2, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. What does this mean? Well, David wanted a large measure of God's mercy for himself. So David gave Saul a large measure of mercy himself. That mercy will be great blessing to David later in his life. That's what I wanted to, that's one of the things I wanted to share with you guys. Let me see here. Okay. Now to continue here, Saul recognized David's voice and responded by calling him my son David. But David did not call him my father as he had before. He addressed was only my lord the king. Saul's daughter Michal was no longer David's wife, so David was no longer son-in-law to the king. Also, Saul certainly had not treated David like a son. Remember that. Once again, David tried to reason with Saul and show him how wrong he was in his thinking and acting. David wanted to know what his crime was, that Saul had to pursue him and seek to kill him. If David had broken one of God's laws, then he was willing to bring a sacrifice and have his sin forgiven by the Lord. But if Saul was treating David like a criminal because of the lies his officers had told him, then they were the offenders, not David. And they would pay for their sins. Saul and his officers had driven David out of his own land, the very inheritance that the Lord had given his family. And if David moved to other lands, how could he worship Jehovah away from the priesthood and the sanctuary? But if David was not guilty of any crime or sin, why should Saul invest so much time and energy in pursuing him? That's the question of the day right there. The king of Israel was chasing a partridge. What? Yes, a partridge. You know what a partridge is, right? A partridge. It's a wild bird who doesn't like to fly. They only run from one cover to another. So once again, Saul lapsed into one of his sentimental moods and confessed that he was a fool and a sinner. He promised that he would not harm David, but David did not believe him. His only reply was, "Behold, the king's spear. Let one of you young men come over and fetch it." When David cut Saul's robe in the cave, he reminded him that his kingdom would be severed from him. But in taking the spear, he humiliated the king and robbed him of the symbol of his authority. So that was chapter 26. All right, let me put this away. My little notes. It's all right. We're almost done. We're almost done with 1 Samuel.